Full Contact Podcast, buckle up, you heard, like, follow, and share. Lycoming, you heard, we dare. Pulses of the Portland, why do people leave? Crank up the truth with Beth and Steve.
Welcome back to Lycoming, ya heard. I'm Steve Marshall.
And I'm Beth Fulmer.
We're diving into a topic that I know a lot of you in Lycoming County are worried about. The treatment of disabled inmates at the county prison.
It's a big one, yeah.
Yeah, especially after that article that Mustin Hale wrote for FAFO Media, about the veteran who says his rights were violated. It's a story that, well, it makes you think, how are we treating the most vulnerable people we've got?
Absolutely. In this case, it's not just about, one person's experience. This could have a ripple effect, like, across the country for disability rights and prisons everywhere,
Exactly. And that's why we're taking a deep dive into this whole thing today. I mean, we've got legal stuff to look at, Supreme Court cases, and of course that investigation that FAFO Media did.
Yeah, we've got a lot to cover for sure.
Right.
I really want to make sure that you understand the laws and how they work and how it all connects back to this specific case. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And I think even more important than just understanding the laws is what can we do about it?
Right. We want to give you the tools so you can, as concerned citizens, actually make a difference.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start with, the basics, I guess you could say. We've got the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and then there's the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. These seem to be, they're pretty important when it comes to disability rights. But, in real life, how do these laws actually work?
Well, think of them as shields, right, against discrimination. The ADA basically says, look, you can't treat people unfairly just because they have a disability. And that goes for everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's a school, a workplace, even, a restaurant.
Huh. Even restaurants, okay.
Yeah, everywhere, even prisons.
Prisons. I mean, they seem kind of different, right, than a restaurant or something.
Oh, for sure. Prisons are unique. But legally speaking, they're still public entities, right? So they have to follow the ADA. That means they got to provide reasonable accommodations for inmates with disabilities. Like wheelchair ramp, cells that are accessible, even making changes to work programs.
So, if an inmate needs a modified work program because of a disability, the prison has to, figure that out?
Yeah, exactly. And especially if the prison gets federal funding.
Which Lycoming County Prison does, right?
Exactly. So that means they also have to follow Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And that section, basically it says if you're getting money from the feds, you can't discriminate based on disability. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay, so there are, actual consequences if a prison doesn't follow these laws.
Oh, yeah, big time. They could lose that federal funding, which, nobody wants that. It would be a huge financial hit. Plus, they could get sued by inmates whose rights have been violated. It's serious stuff.
Wow, okay, so then that kind of leads us to this really important Supreme Court case, Pennsylvania Department of Corrections versus Yeski. This one seems like it could really affect what's happening here in Lycoming County. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. It sets a huge precedent. Basically, this case made it super clear, crystal clear, that the ADA applies to state prisons. No exceptions. This guy, Ronald Yeski, he was an inmate, had a heart condition. They wouldn't let him into this boot camp program because of his disability. And the Supreme Court said, nope, that's discrimination.
So if the veteran here in Lycoming County, if they told him he couldn't do work release just because he's disabled, well, that seems like it goes against that Yeski ruling, doesn't it?
It raises some big questions, yeah. And remember that article by Mustin Hale in FAFO Media? It spells out the veteran's allegations, pretty clearly.
Yeah, that article really, it got to me. I mean, he's saying they told him flat out, no work release. Because, and get this, he claims they said none of the employers they work with, none of them would accommodate his disabilities.
Wow. See, and that's a bold statement, right? Because the ADA is really specific. Prisons have to make an effort, a real effort, to find work placements for inmates with disabilities. If they just shrugged and said, tough luck, no options, well, that doesn't sound very reasonable to me.
And it gets worse, right? He also says that they made him work at the county landfill, even though he's got, documented disabilities from the VA.
Oh, wow. That raises some red flags for sure. Did they even consider his medical needs? Think about the fact that he could get even more injured. The whole point of the ADA is to prevent things like that.
Right, exactly. And Mustin Hale, in his article, he also points out that this veteran had a clean record the whole time he was in prison. He was a model inmate. So why wouldn't they give him this opportunity?
It makes you wonder. They would have to have a really, really good reason to deny him work release. And just having a disability, that's not a good enough reason.
Man, this is frustrating, the whole situation.
It is. It really makes you think about how we treat people with disabilities, not just in prisons, but like in our whole justice system.
And it shows how much we need, like, more people watching what's going on. That's why I think this idea of a citizen advisory board is so important. We need to talk about that more.
Yeah, that advisory board, I mean, that could really change things, bring some transparency to the prison system, let the community have a say, make sure that people are held accountable for how they're treating inmates, especially, the ones with disabilities.
I'm glad he's pushing for that for sure. It feels like a real step in the right direction, something that could actually make a difference. But I'm also, there was something else I was thinking about when we were doing our research. The 14th Amendment, how does that fit in with all of this?
Oh, the 14th Amendment, that's a powerful one. It guarantees equal protection under the law for everybody, and that includes people in prison, too.
So even though, they're incarcerated, their freedom's restricted, they still can't be discriminated against, like based on their race or their religion or if they have a disability.
Exactly. You don't lose your basic rights just because you're behind bars. And that's what makes this so interesting, right? You've got the 14th Amendment, and then you've got the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act. It's like this multi-layered protection for inmates with disabilities. And it's not just about being nice. It's about upholding the Constitution, making sure that, our justice system is actually just.
Right, right. And remember what we were talking about before. With the federal funding, that adds another layer of, like, accountability.
Absolutely. It's like if you're a prison and you want that money from the feds, well, you got to play by their rules. And those rules include protecting the rights of disabled inmates.
It's like the federal government saying, here's the money, but you better make sure you're treating everyone fairly.
Yep, you got it. And that's why this case in Lycoming County, it's a big deal. It goes beyond just what happened to this one veteran. It's about making sure that the system, like the whole system, is fair for everyone.
And that's where the idea of that citizen advisory board, it just makes even more sense. It's about having the community there, making sure those rights are actually being protected, not just on paper.
It's about accountability, like having a citizen advisory board that gives you some outside oversight, which a lot of prison systems don't really have. It's about, making sure our prisons are actually helping people, not just punishing them.
In that article in FAFO Media, there's one quote from the veteran that really stuck with me. He just said, "I want to be treated fairly."
Yeah, that's all he wants. It's simple, but it says so much about how tough it is for inmates with disabilities and how we need a system that actually protects them.
Doing this deep dive, it's made me think about the ADA and these other laws and how they work in prisons. It's not something I've ever really, thought about before. But it's important. Like, we got to be advocating for everyone's rights, even the people who are locked up.
Exactly. It's like they say, knowledge is power, right? The more we understand this stuff, the more we can actually do something about it.
So let's talk about that. Like, what can people in Lycoming County actually do to make a difference?
Well, first of all, stay informed. The more you know about these laws and how they work, the better you'll be at fighting for change.
And don't just, take our word for it. Read the actual laws yourself. Do your own research, form your own opinions.
And remember those things we were talking about before, about actually taking action.
Yeah, like going to the county commissioner meetings. That's a great way to make your voice heard. Something we've been talking about a lot is this idea of reasonable accommodations. It keeps coming up.
Yeah, it's a key part of the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act. And it's not about, special treatment or anything. It's about making sure that people with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else, like to participate in programs and activities.
So with this veteran, if he needed certain things to be able to do work release, the prison has to try to make that happen, right? Within reason, of course.
Absolutely. They can't just blow him off. It's their job to figure out what he needs and what they can do to accommodate those needs.
But then that brings up another question. What's reasonable, right? That seems kind of, I don't know, subjective.
It is. It can be. The law doesn't give you a perfect definition of what's reasonable. It really depends on the situation, the person's disability, what resources are available. It's complicated.
So who decides what's reasonable? It seems like that could lead to a lot of legal fights.
Oh, it definitely can. And that's where the courts come in. They have to balance things out. Like, what are the individual's rights? And then, what does the prison need to do to keep things safe and running smoothly?
It's a tough job.
It is. And that's why cases like this one in Lycoming County are so important. They make us think about these really hard questions and make sure that our justice system is actually just for everyone.
Which brings us back to that citizen advisory board that the veteran is asking for.
Right. He wants a board made up of people from the community to keep an eye on the prison system.
And he really wants people to get involved. If you care about this issue, now's the time to do something. Here's what he wanted us to tell everyone, word for word. Lycoming County Commissioners meet every Thursday at 10 a.m. at the Commissioners Boardroom in the Executive Plaza, 330 Pine Street, Williamsport. You can also contact your local state representatives, Jamie Flick in the 83rd District and Joe Ham in the 84th District. And for a more statewide perspective, you can visit Senator Gene Yaw's office, also on Pine Street in downtown Williamsport.
This is about more than just one guy. It's about what kind of community we want to live in.
It's about treating everyone with dignity and respect, no matter what their situation is.
And that's something we all have to think about.
This deep dive has been, well, it's been really eye-opening, but it's also left me with a lot of questions.
And that's a good thing. Questions lead to conversations, and conversations lead to action, right?
You know, it's easy to get lost in the legal details and stuff, but we can't forget that this is about real people. That article that Mustin Hale wrote for FAFO Media, that really hit home for me.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff for sure. It reminds you that these aren't just cases, These are people's lives.
I keep thinking about that veteran and what he must be going through, being denied those opportunities that could actually, help him get back on his feet.
Yeah, it really makes you question how we see people with disabilities, right? Not just in prisons, but everywhere in our whole society.
And that's why I think this whole idea of a citizen advisory board is so important. It's about giving a voice to the people who don't usually have one.
It's about making sure that the system, that it actually works for everyone, not just the people who already have power. You know what I mean?
It's about building a better world for all of us, a world that's fair, a world that's kind.
It's interesting, right? We've been talking about all these different laws and stuff, and I'm really struck by how the 14th Amendment, how it connects with the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act. It's like they all work together to create this really strong protection for the rights of inmates with disabilities.
Like a safety net, right? Even in prison, where you don't have a lot of freedom, your basic human rights, they still matter.
That 14th Amendment, that's a big one. Equal protection under the law. That's the foundation of our whole democracy. Everybody deserves to be treated with respect, no matter who they are, no matter what they've done.
And that's a message that needs to reach inside those prison walls.
Because, how we treat people in prison, that says a lot about us, about what we value as a society.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, we want to leave you with something to think about. What do you think? What role should our community play in making sure that our prisons are fair and just and humane?
Is it enough to just rely on the courts and the laws? Or do we have a responsibility to do more, to get involved, to hold people accountable, to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves?
These are tough questions, but they're important.
How we treat people in prison, that's a reflection of who we are as a community. It's something we all need to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some things to think about and, maybe even inspired you to take action.
Remember, knowledge is power. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep fighting for a better world.
Has no snooky, that's the word. And Missy Lane's sugar cookies slap, you heard. Follow, and share. Lycoming, you heard, we dare. Pulses up the port, and why do people leave? Crank up the truth with Beth and Steve.